us. So the only thing that's hard on me when we sit in circle is that I really want to stay in this kind of holarchy and, I'm like a mover, you know? So that's the only piece, but I'm going to be really stay in my chair. I'm doing it for Doug. So, you know,
Feel free to be you.
One of the blessings of my life is that I am fairly often invited to speak about peace and peace building. And it has occurred to me more than once over the years that the reason for that is because when I was very young, I had an altercation with my brother that was quite serious. And maybe you can imagine I was a bit willful as a child and could rage. And when I did that with my brother, I happened to be holding a baseball bat at the time. And I was only 13, he was 11, and I was going to do some serious damage. And as I share this story, I didn't know I was going to open with this story until all of the sharing in this circle just now, because it really touches me that what happened was I looked into his eyes, luckily, and I saw myself. And I had a complete metamorphosis kind of chrysalis experience. Just burst into tears, dropped the bat, and went and hid myself somewhere for a while. It would be years later when I would realize and be able to articulate that what happened to me in that moment is I chose peace. And I have dedicated my life. My brother died very young, and I have dedicated myself and my life to helping to end the cycle of violence, to make violence history. Now, the deal is, I'm not an anti kind of gal. So it's very hard on me to show up and, although we need to resist when necessary and we need to name what's not okay, and as you'll hear me say, we're in an all systems breakdown, and we can name all those pieces, and then we fall off the side of our chair, and then what do we talk about? How do we actually proactively build the infrastructure of peace? And I'm going to continue to claim that word. Peace, living in harmonious relationship with myself, with others, and with all life. And there has got to be a way to do that. And the fact is, we know how to do this at this point. And they're hearing about it with the River Phoenix Center in the opposite us. And there are many, many things around the world, and many of my colleagues and friends around this planet who are doing that work. Well, in this country, and as you brought up, thank you for mentioning our founding fathers. When they founded this country, in spite of the revolutionary kind of violence that happened in the midst of all that, what they knew was that they were founding the new America. They were founding the melting pot, the potential for a democracy where we are united through our diversity, and that would be about peace. Thomas Jefferson spoke to that. Benjamin Franklin spoke to that. Benjamin Rush and Benjamin Banneker teamed to call for a Department of Peace at that time to stand alongside the Department of War, which eventually became the Department of State. So when we understand our history, and when we understand that George Washington at that time called for an Academy of Peace to rigorously train citizens so that we could actually get to where we want to go, knowing that if we continue to do the same training of military with a focus on winning a war or winning a contest, a military contest, that's what we would keep getting. Because as Confucius said so wisely, if you keep going in the direction you're going, you're going to get there. So how is it that we actually help anchor what this country is founded upon, the very principles of peace? Again, living in harmonious relationship. Some would say right relationship, in spite of that word, how it triggers politically, with self, others, and all life. So at the time of that founding, as our founding fathers were signing a Declaration of Independence, and this was part of the conversation, it actually goes a little beyond in history to the Iroquois Confederacy. And many of you in this circle, I'm sure, are aware of this. And that as the country was being founded, Chief Seattle and others were addressing, at the request of the founders, how to set up the government. And that's how the government was founded. Now, there's only one circle that was missing at the time of the 5 circles of the Iroquois Confederacy that would actually keep them from fighting with one another, and that was the circle of women. And most of us don't understand that in our history either, and it's now, we heard Ambassador Chowdhury yesterday speaking to Resolution 1325 at the United Nations that calls for women at, and I'm going to say at the peace and diplomatic dialogues around the world. That has to happen. And if you haven't seen Pray the Devil Back to Hell, watch that documentary.
Oh, definitely.
Yes. So, and I'll talk offline about whatever you want, but I'm just going to move through this in this country, because that's not this country, that's another country. So, in this country then, what happened is, over the years, there were a number of bipartisan bills in the United States Congress put forth calling for a Department of Peace. And the greatest number of them happened in the 60s and 70s. At the same time, in the 60s and 70s, there was a big push, and particularly during the Carter administration, for a National Peace Academy with a focus on conflict resolution. And in fact, President Jimmy Carter, tasked Senator Spark Matsunanga to take Elise Boulding, right? Many of you know her as the mother of peace research and a wonderful peace educator, and Professor James Lowy around the country to see if United States citizens thought that a peace academy was a good idea. Overwhelmingly, what was the answer?
Yes.
Yes, yes, we think it's a great idea. At the time, George Mason University in Northern Virginia, founded in 1972, was in the early growth stages. So during the Carter administration, and knowing now with this bipartisan support that there would most likely be a National Peace Academy, and right behind it, a Department of Peace, because there was bipartisan support for that as well, leading academics approached the administration at George Mason University and said to them, why don't you house this National Peace Academy? And they said yes. So at the time, a piece of land was donated, also little known, by the Lynch family in Northern Virginia to George Mason University, and it is called Point of View. And that was dedicated to this initiative. Well, Jimmy Carter didn't get a second term. During the Reagan administration, when the commission reported on this task force, and it was overwhelmingly going to happen, the Reagan administration decided, let's found a United States Institute of Peace. And they did. And it is tied to the State Department, and they do basically research and training internationally. And they're on the Mall. We have a Peace Institute on the Mall in the United States of America. That rocks the house. At the same time, those who are on the board and those who are in support will be the first ones to say, just as those on the panel yesterday, that the ideal situation is that the United States Institute of Peace and the State Department, Secretary of State, are those very ones who would do what a Department of Peace would do. And I want to hearken to what Ann just shared. There is not a domestic focus there. And for me, from day one, when I heard then Congressman Dennis Kucinich speak about the Department of Peace, I thought, oh my goodness. Exactly. That's perfect, because now we will also have the domestic focus in the United States of America that our founding fathers recognized as absolutely necessary if we want to actually be the peaceful society that we and I will put this out there, are destined to be. So, now Congressman Kucinich decides to run for president. Well, actually, he put the bill out on July 11th, 2001, and 60 days later, 9/11 happened. And we didn't hear about the bill again, basically, until Marianne Williamson's group stepped forth and said, we're going to found a peace alliance in the United States of America, and we're going to focus on making one of the biggest and best citizen lobbying efforts ever. And of course, there had been a campaign back when, thanks to, during the Carter administration, and we tapped into that, and we built an infrastructure of all of us here and everyone else around the country calling for a United States Department of Peace. As you know, my tenure was a few years, and then I decided with a couple of others who were very active like this, let's get together a group of citizens and let's found the citizens version of the National Peace Academy and get this going. So we did that. Just before we did that, we helped, the Peace Alliance helped found the Global Alliance for Ministries and Infrastructures for Peace. And that is now 56 countries strong. And our colleagues include those with the Peace Research Institute in Romania, with the group that's founding a National Peace Academy in Kathmandu, Nepal, those in Nepal who helped after the king was deposed, put forward, there's now a Ministry of Peace and Reconstruction. Our colleagues in Costa Rica, where we know about Costa Rica, and there is now a Ministry of Peace and Justice and Peace in Costa Rica, and a National Peace Academy, where in Canada there is now verbiage in the legislation that speaks to peace and peace building. There's an Institute of Peace. I could take us around the world. I could take us through at least 19 countries in Africa, where in Rwanda there is a National Peace Academy. In Ghana there are efforts. There are folks here who are working with all of that. In Cape Town, where the president lives, there's a tremendous push for peace education, etc. So there is just so much happening. There's infrastructures for peace as an organization. The Peace Alliance has been instrumental in helping to inform and inspire around the world with all of our colleagues, all of this happening. So now we come home to the United States, and here we are in this circle, and we are determining as citizens, once again, the viability and the value of lobbying for a United States Department of Peace Building. And for whoever is watching this, sit with that for a moment. What is it going to take in the United States of America for every one of us to say yes to something that will move us through the broken systems that we are dealing with right now, to actually build the transformative system, not fix the old, build the transformative system that will allow us to govern ourselves in this country reflective of and informed by the shared values that most of us will agree upon if we sit in circle until we get into the details of how to do it. But most of us will agree upon loving understanding, cooperation, empathy. Everyone learns to resolve conflict before it escalates to violence. Healthy communication in relationships, anger management, de-escalation of violence. It's not rocket science. And we know what to do and we know how to do it. When will we have the social will in this country to dare to force, and I mean force, the political will in this country to anchor something at that level that our founding fathers recognized was necessary in order to move us, all of us, through into this next era. So I submit that a Department of Peacebuilding is one of those radical infrastructures that would cause us to have the kind of dialogue and debate around what it is that needs to happen in this country in a way that would produce something in our government that would empower a voice at the cabinet level to be present when decisions are being made and strategies are being worked out as to how we present ourselves in the world, how we collaborate with other countries. But I'm going to say even more than that, because we all know where peace starts. Peace starts with me. It starts right here. I show up, I've said this internationally at Global Alliance summits for all these years. Everyone in this room is a Secretary of Peace. I am my own Secretary of Peace first. Then I'm going to be Secretary of Peace with my friends and family and community. And then, who knows, maybe one of us in this circle someday. It's time. And the final piece I'm going to say is that we just signed the Memorandum of Understanding, the National Peace Academy, at Point of View, the piece of land that was donated. The story is a wonderful story of how the dean, Kevin Averick, was the assistant professor at the time during the Carter administration when all that happened. He's now the dean. He and I met at an event where Joaquin Phoenix was the host out in California. And when we shared stories, we decided, you know what? Let's do this. Let's bring it home.
Yay.
And imagine a civilian Camp David. So, having said that, I know there is much to share about the bill itself and how we can speak to this in a way that determines the future, actually. We're the very ones in this circle right here and now who determine the future of lobbying efforts, at least through the Peace Alliance, and then in connection with other groups, as we've heard all weekend, of whether or not the kind of support in this country that calls forth a Department of Education, that there was a time that there wasn't that, right? Or other departments. So I'll just cast my vote, yes, and say thank you for giving me the time and circle to share what is very dear to my heart and continues to be so. And yeah, may the spirit of peace be spread abroad in our hearts, through our groups, and throughout the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen, would you